This is Anna Eskamani. She is a representative from Florida House District 47, which is downtown Orlando, Belle Isle, Winter Park, and the Conway area. And before I even get into letting Anna talk, I just want to say I was a part of, FYI, I guess I should say, a part of Anna's campaign, along with a lot of great people. It was the most fun I had in the last 2 weeks of the election, which I really did a lot for her then with the rest of the people. So I love Anna because she says what she means what she says, and she stands up for progressive principles, fighting to raise the minimum wage, which we finally did pass here in Florida in 2020, healthcare for all, housing for all, LGBTQ rights, and women's rights. So Anna, first of all, thanks again for coming on, and congratulations on winning re-election.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being a part of our victory. As you know, we won by a larger margin than we did in 2018 this year. So it's the hard work of all of our incredible volunteers and staff, and of course our constituents that are so incredible and staying with us on everything we fight for.
So Anna, let's talk about the election, winning by, I believe it was 18 or 19 points. 1 or 2 points off, whatever it is, but it was a huge victory, like you said. And
very
you
close,
were
60%.
okay. Well, my thing is, Anna, is you always, and we talked about this in the introduction, you always run as a true blue progressive, and you did flip 2 Trump precincts that did go for President Trump, and you do have a lot of Republican voters that do vote for you. So in a state like Florida, which 2020 was a disaster in, how did you do this and get those voters that were Trump voters and flip those precincts in general?
Well, it takes a lot of constant work and commitment and conversations and building trust with your community in order to actually earn that type of diverse support of folks potentially voting against their own party and voting for you. And most folks know that since my first days running for public office, back when we started this initial campaign in 2017, where we flipped a seat, we've always been grounded in everyday people and meeting folks belly to belly, having conversations that focus on their lived experiences and their quality of life, and helping to craft this mission where your self-interest is valued and respected, but can also reflect the needs of our community's interests. So this notion that it's not a zero-sum game, you don't have to lose for other people to win, but instead this notion that we can all win together. And we built that by having a intentional dialogue and conversations with our district, showing up at every type of event, being able to go to the wealthiest of homes to talk about quality of life with people speeding on lakefront property, all the way to hotel lobbies and motel lobbies of families that can't afford rent, but are living in these hotels and need help to make their ends meet. So it's a rainbow coalition where people lead the initiative, people are the center of everything we do. And that, combined with our accessibility, our authenticity, our ability to actually have impact in improving people's lives, I think are all part of the secret sauce that allows us to not only serve this district, but to serve it with so much love and support every step of the way.
Well, I think also the great things that you've done, not only helping people with unemployment, donating your salary, and also helping a lot of those peoples that were in those hotels in Kissimmee and raising that money for those people that really did need it and they are down on their luck. So you were one of the few politicians, if maybe the only one in the state and in the country in general, that is doing those great things. And that's really great constituent service to really what you and Lauren and Alex do in the office. And I really commend you guys for that, because I've never really met, and I'm not trying to pump you guys up, but what's true is true. I've never met any kind of politician that has really been that great at constituent service, such as you guys. The answers are usually like a snap of the fingers, and you do get back to, the people fairly quick. Let's be honest. So thank you for that.
Well, and we're lucky to be able to leverage our relationships to do good. I mean, even today, one of our one of our donors who has been one of our most supportive campaign donors, I have not asked him for donations to our campaign, but he has offered to make donations towards our community fund to get direct cash assistance to people. And so today he actually just gave us $5,000. So we have been giving out to constituents in need. Earlier today, one of our constituents who contacted us yesterday, him and his partner are $1,200 away from making their ends meet this December. They have deferred their car payments for as long as they can, and the car is going to be repossessed unless they could find $1,200. They're both working. One of them is an Uber and Lyft like driver and food delivery, so they need the car. And so, after talking to them and trying to get them other community resources, this donor stepped up to help. And so we're going to be, we gave them $1,200 to pay for their car expenses. And they were in tears, because again, folks are trying really hard to survive right now, but the options are just so limited and things are really scary. And we have to focus on public service. And that means listening to folks, problem solving alongside you, and trying to help however we can. And we're really, really proud to be able to do that.
So what went wrong for Democrats in 2020, and what can they do to fix these issues to win some races in 2022? Let's be honest.
Well, these problems are systematic, Rob, and we've talked about them in the past too. I mean, I think there continues to be absolutely no infrastructure, no long-term infrastructure that's actually designed to meet people where they're at and to build relationships and to build power long-term. Time and time again in states like Florida, you just see money and campaign staff parachute into Florida who don't carry a lot of either Florida experience or wins under their belt for Florida races. And yet these are the folks that we hire and we pay to manage these really important campaigns. We saw no field operation to a very large degree. We saw voter registration efforts stop during the pandemic and shift to vote by mail, which we saw robust vote by mail turnout, but voters who typically vote in person just voted by mail. It wasn't that we expanded the electorate, right? Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, our opposition, they were doing just that. They were getting more voters into their universe to then get them out to vote. Mm-hmm. And so we also saw a lack of intentional outreach with our communities of color, specifically providing media that was multilingual and actually talking to folks in their language, in their neighborhoods, building those relationships over time. And I think the final area too is just, what was the message? What values do we have? I think there is such a concern to come off as bold or aggressive or progressive that we end up not having any values. And a lot of folks have asked me, like, do you think the Democratic Party needs to be more left or more progressive? And I'm like, we just have to have a message. We don't even need to put a label on it. We just need a message. And I think if you were to pull aside the average Floridian, and ask folks, what does it mean to be a Democrat? What does the Democratic Party mean to you? What are their values? I think a lot of people would struggle to actually tell you that, because we've done such a poor job in teaching people who we are and empowering them to align with us on issues that impact everyday working people and folks of every economic class, to realize that if you vote for Democrats, your quality of life will be better. Yeah. Bottom line. But we haven't been able to really inspire people to feel that way.
Well, the thing that you guys did as far as Team On in general is that you did a safe door-to-door campaign. It was non-touch. No one was face-to-face with anybody. The Democratic Party of Florida did not do any of that as far as I know. The Trump campaign in general was doing, well, they were doing face-to-face, but they were still knocking on doors throughout the whole election season of Florida. So it's funny that the Trump campaign was doing it, and they end up winning Florida in the largest margin that they've won Florida in quite a long time as far as the Republican Party on a presidential level. And you guys won, and you were going door to door along with all the other fighters for Team On the ground, and you won by 18, 19 points. So it's a little just that the Democratic Party, I believe, in the state of Florida should be looking at campaigns like yours, that you flip that seat in 2018 from red to blue, and then you come out on top and 2 years later by 19, 20 points. I mean, what is going on in this party? And they run the same establishment candidates and get the same results. And I hate to bring out names, but we talk about Charlie Crist. I mean, I think Andrew Gillum did run a good campaign. I think he did make some mistakes, but we talk about these people, Alex Sink, Charlie Crist. They might be great people in person, God bless them, but they run these same moderate campaigns. And as Andrew Gillum said, we cannot run moderate light. We have to run as true blue believers, whatever it is. If you're a moderate, you're a true blue moderate. You don't run away from positions. So I do want to get into that as the next question. We saw, as a progressive myself, but we did see progressives that were running on the progressive mantle of Medicare for all, Green New Deal, defunding the police. On those agendas, all those congressional Democrats and senators that did run on that mantle, they all won their reelection. But the people that were scared to call themselves, they were scared of the word socialist. They were scared of being called progressive. They all lost. I mean, we look at in South Florida, the two congresswomen that ran down there, Donna Shalala, and I forgot the other woman's name.
PNP.
Yes, thank you. They both lost, and they were in districts that they were swing districts, and they won in 2018. So what would you say, as a progressive yourself, you don't shy away from these labels? You really don't give a damn, to be honest. You say, well, I mean, it's true. You don't run away from this stuff. Who cares? So what would you say to these Democrats that do run with their tail between their legs when they're called a socialist, or they're for Medicare for all, or they're for a Green New Deal?
Right. It's a great question. I mean, I think the reality is that we let the opposition define us before we even are defining ourselves. So you have to ask yourself, like, who am I? Who am I fighting for? And not be afraid to punch back when you are attacked. I mean, it's totally fine if these are labels that you don't identify with. I mean, honestly, like you said, I don't like labels at all. I mean,
Anna, they call everybody a socialist. They call Barack Obama a socialist. They called Joe Biden a socialist. They called John Kerry a socialist.
Correct. That was literally my next point, is like, no matter what you do, they're going to call you everything under the sun. So just be yourself, right? Just be yourself and be ready to respond. I mean, you can't run away from responding. And, I think one of the best counters to all the socialism rhetoric is that there is nothing more socialist than corporations influencing the political process, and politicians picking winners and losers by cutting tax breaks to their donors while they get public health care plans, while you get paid a shitty wage and don't even have health care. Like, that is corporate socialism. So if we're going to have that debate, let's have that debate, right? But the problem is that so many Democrats can't even say that because they get money from corporations. So I think, so it's funny. My enemy is never people. Like, I think going back to your first question about how do we earn the support of Republicans, we don't demonize Republicans. Like, I will call out Republican elected officials that are doing things poorly, and I will celebrate those where we align 100%. My target really, when it comes to concerns in policymaking or political influence, are special interests and corporations. And there's plenty of examples of corporations bending policy in their favor when working people suffer, or when environmental injustice take place, or mass incarceration. There's so many examples, right, of corporate influence dictating policy that's impacting your life and the life of those that you care about. So when you can paint those pictures for people, they totally get it. And folks hate crony capitalism. Folks hate having to pay taxes while corporations don't. These are injustices that we can call out collectively, and we can afford all these other programs if people pay if corporations pay their taxes. Like, and that's what drives me crazy is, there's always this debate about, well, Democrats want to increase taxes and whatever. And it's like, no, actually, I just want to make sure that corporations are literally paying their taxes like all of us are. But so many Democrats are shy to talk about these issues because, like I said, it could upset their corporate donors and their friends that are lobbyists for these corporations. So they're shy and hesitant to make any decisions or make any statements. And
Wow.
we then, as a result, we get really squishy Democrats that people are not inspired to come out for, that you're not drawing a contrast between you and your opponent. And your opponent is, running around you, calling you ridiculous things that are not true, but you don't create any opportunities to call them out.
Well, when we talk about taxes, the taxes, and we look at the blue states, these taxes are high because a lot of these states have the best funded schools. They have the best schools. We look
Right.
at Massachusetts, they call it Taxachusetts, but they have the best schools in the country as far as public schools. So if you want to have shitty schools and have all these and not good services for people that have disabilities, for people that are, impoverished in any way or shape or form, then that's the programs you're going to get. If you want to pay the money, you'll get the good schools, well-funded fire departments, well-funded police departments, and that's what you'll get. You'll get those services. So a lot of Democrats don't talk about it that way also, and that's another problem too.
I mean, you have to, you need to be yourself, and you have to lead with values, and focus on directly impacted people and what their needs are, and be willing to go into the gray. Like we did an educational session this week focused on healthcare systems and explain to people, like, here's the current healthcare infrastructure in Florida. Here's what Medicare is, what Medicaid is, what employer-based healthcare is. Here's what a single payer looks like. Here's what a public option looks like. Here's what other countries do. I think the other frustrating piece in politics is that, like, we don't give time to nuance. So when you're not campaigning, especially as an incumbent, it's an opportunity to get to know your district and to talk about issues without there being a campaign to worry about, right? And so I think there's a lot of work we can do as public servants, in the non-campaign season, to also inspire, educate, and empower our constituents, so that when misinformation, disinformation campaigns come, you've already set the standard of what's fact. And so it's not as penetratable at that point.
With the Biden administration, you have, all these people in there, and just to name three people, and the New York Times wrote a good article about this. We look at who's going to probably be the Secretary of Defense is Michelle Flournoy. She was for the war in Libya, which led to slave trade, which is still going on in Libya. Also for the intervention in Syria and how that's been a terrible disaster as far as being in the Obama administration. We look at Neera Tanden, who hates progressives, and she's against Medicare for all. And there was also a person, African-American man, who is going to be the deputy Treasury Secretary, who've worked for BlackRock, who is a total travesty Wall Street company.
Right.
So, I mean, we talk about, and I don't want to ramble on, but we talk about all these people that are, it's a woman, it's an African-American, it's a Hispanic American, it's a white man. But if these people, whether they are white, black, Hispanic, gay, straight, if we talk about these people and they are not for us, they are not for working people, they worked on Wall Street, they were for all these wars, what's the point of having a woman in there, an African-American or Hispanic American, or somebody that's of LGBT descent? Why should we put these people in power if they're against all the things that we truly believe in? That's just, I think it's just a travesty. What's your take on that?
There's been a lot of frustration, especially on social media, echoing exactly the points that you're making. And I think it's this, it's the line between identity politics and ideology and values. And it's such a delicate subject, because I agree with your point that representation does matter, but if that representation is also proposing policies or making decisions that hurt directly impacted people, then we need to call it out. And I believe firmly that people can evolve over time. I have witnessed that in my career at Planned Parenthood. I've witnessed that as a lawmaker of people that really, really did not like me in the beginning, and then we begin to find common ground. And so I give a lot of grace, to the evolution and the complexity of people always. But I do think we need to be careful about throwing our support without question behind people based solely on their identity. And I even look back at, like, my work in public office and as an advocate. Like, I identify as a woman of color. And 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 my experiences provide me with a really great lens to analyze issues and to solve problems and to put myself in other people's shoes. But at the end of the day, I never campaigned on you should vote for me because I'm a woman of color, right? Like I campaigned on issues. And my lived experiences as a daughter of immigrants absolutely fuel my perspective on issues. But when I'm talking to someone at a door or calling a constituent or solving a some sort of crisis, it's my values that define the issues we prioritize and push us to solve these problems. And so I'm always a firm believer in working to support representation and diversity while also being reflective on values. And there have been moments where I've made endorsements in races that, have been somewhat controversial because like I've endorsed a candidate that is much more stronger on our values, but is not a person of color, right? Or maybe they're a woman, but not a person of color, or they're white passing, whatever it is. And it's frustrating because I think that there are so many examples of folks of any background, doesn't matter, voting against their community in the sense that they're elected to serve a community and they don't do a good job representing that community. And I have also endorsed in Democratic primaries against some really bad Democrats and supporting the really strong Democrats in those races. And I don't carry shame about that. I think it's important that we do that. And again, it goes back to our point about having values. If we don't have values, then what do we have? But I will say, in the case of Vice President Joe Biden, now President-elect Joe Biden, we cannot be surprised, right? Like none of it is a surprise to me, which is probably why like my outrage is a little more measured because I kind of expected this. But I do remain hopeful that there will be more appointments coming forward that reflect both representation and values, because there are plenty of people that are qualified on both fronts that can represent what this country looks like, while also representing the values that support the needs of everyday working people, that support diplomacy over war, and are going to put this country in a reset, back on the right track. So I remain very hopeful about that. Still.
Well, my thing is, I feel like the establishment on both sides play identity politics because they don't want people that are working people to know the real issues going on in our country. Because most people are working 2 or 3 jobs and they're working over 40 hours a week. So they cannot follow the rules and be in politics as depth as, somebody like,
it's not a bad point. It's not a bad point, Rob. And which is why, when I talk about issues, like I always do in the lens of, a multiracial coalition, right? Like, because you can't, you gotta find ways to lift up all boats. And, some of the issues that we care about, even if they're centered on disparities among race, everyone benefits. I mean, my freedom is tied to your freedom. My prosperity is tied to your prosperity. So I always kind of see it too as just like all of us being linked together. And again, it goes back, and I agree that it's so ironic because I get accused of identity politics a lot by Republicans, yet they're the ones that practice it probably the most. And so it is such a frustrating dynamic. But I think at the end of the day, we try really hard to listen to one another, to also create spaces for directly impacted people to lead and to step back, to let directly impacted people lead, especially in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. I have been very critical of even myself and being, stepping back, passing the mic, and doing whatever I can with my positional privilege to lift up other voices. And I think that, we can all practice that a lot better too.
I'm kind of sick of the demonization of Iran in general. And I know you're an Iranian American and you do have deep ties in the community in general. What is your opinion, first question, on the killing of the Iranian nuclear scientist?
Well, it definitely makes it much more difficult to get both of our countries back on a path towards diplomacy, without a doubt. I think it's made pretty clear that the Trump administration is, as they prepare to exit, are trying to make it as difficult as possible for there to be diplomacy and for there to be success on domestic policy as well. So it definitely seems like an intentional move. I don't even think the Trump administration has even commented on it yet. And my fear about these type of attacks is that, first of all, just any type of attack on sovereign soil of another country is problematic, when it comes to just international law. But thinking about it from the context of what happens inside Iran, these type of attacks can help build anti-American sentiment in countries like Iran, and can help also build up nationalism, which gives the extremists in Iran more power. So I'm always concerned when I also just put myself in the shoes of our U.S. troops and thinking about the potential of war and putting them in harm's way. And I think the more and more that these international stakeholders in our country escalates tensions with governments like Iran, we're putting our troops at risk. We're putting the path to diplomacy at risk. We're putting prisoners of war at risk. I mean, there are so many human rights violations that Iran is guilty of, and so many people they've incarcerated. And it doesn't seem like the maximum pressure campaign against Iran is even helping to see these folks be released. In most cases, it's some sort of exchange. We actually saw this past week a longtime detained scholar, a British Iranian scholar, be released in exchange for 3 Iranians that were imprisoned with another country. And so oftentimes too, when it comes to even getting people back home, it's rarely is it because of maximum pressure campaigns. So it's scary. It really is. And it continues to make it challenging to put us on a path of diplomacy, and, further feeds into the rhetoric that the president has been flaming, for now 4 years.
Let's kick on some Florida issues here to end the interviews. Now, you just came back from Tallahassee and you met with the Democratic caucus. Can you tell the viewers about it? Did you find out anything about committees, or has that just happened a little bit before March?
Yeah, I definitely can. So we haven't, so we went back to Tallahassee for organizational session, but we haven't had any of our committee assignments yet. We submitted our preferences, but are waiting for the official appointments. We did have the opening remarks by the Speaker of the House, and unfortunately, there was no mention of unemployment or evictions or any of the current issues that folks are facing every single day. So we continue to wait for our committee appointments. We're right now filing bills, so we're in that process. But it is definitely going to be a tough session. We're coming in with a lot less Democrats and still a minority. So it's going to be an uphill battle, but we feel committed to fighting every single day, to leading on constituent services, and to find common ground when possible. I spoke to the Speaker of the House this week, and of course we have many differences, but trying to rise above that and to do what we can to work together seamlessly.
Day after Christmas, there's going to be a lot of people that are losing their benefits. There's also going to be the eviction moratorium that's up in January, where some people are already getting evicted, which has not been a huge story. I just saw in the Tampa Bay Times that they did a story on a man that was getting evicted out of his apartment complex. So what are you proposing to the governor that maybe can get done? I know that there's 5 less seats as far as the House. And obviously, I know JJR just lost in a tight election. I know there was some hanky-panky on that, but we'll go into that another time. So what do you think the governor can do or will do with the losing of benefits in the day after Christmas, and also that eviction moratorium?
It is such a challenging time right now, knowing that Congress hasn't succeeded in passing another relief package. And so there's quite a few things the governor could do to try to lessen the blow. We've asked for a special session for months. Yeah. That would have given us, more of an opportunity and a cushion to try to protect Floridians. But, the governor has absolutely refused to look at ways under the emergency executive order to try to increase weekly benefit amounts. So at this point, he could look at housing protections and try to slow down evictions and foreclosures. At this point, the only protection we have is a federal CDC order that also expires at the end of December. And it really hasn't stopped all evictions. So there could be an opportunity to look at using CARES Act dollars to provide direct assistance towards rental costs.
Right.
Literally just putting money into the hands of renters to pay off their debt. So they don't at least become homeless. I think an investment in housing is probably one of the smartest things Florida can do right now, because it's much more expensive when people lose a home to get them rehoused. And of course, keeping folks housed helps to stop the spread of COVID-19 and is the healthier, safest option to do. So I do think one of the best policies that the governor could explore right now is looking at CARES Act dollars that we still have in the coffers, and using that to make sure that folks don't become homeless due to the pandemic. And he should be leveraging whatever influence he has in Congress to push for our two senators to lead on relief, because that's really what it comes down to is folks being able to continue to maintain their basic needs being met. Now, of course, the unemployment rate has gone down in parts and across the state, but remains really high, especially in Central Florida, with heavy tourism jobs being gone alongside places like Miami-Dade. And so I'm a firm believer in investing in rapid retraining programs and clean energy jobs, and really giving folks that are unemployed an opportunity to reimagine their careers. There has been some money allocated towards career services and our state colleges and tech colleges. And I actually asked DEO for the data this week to see who's applied for those programs so far. But to really think more critically about creating a new economy around things like clean energy, specifically in response to COVID-19 and climate change, I think would be transformational. And we definitely have the will among members like myself to do that. And as long as others share that same will and focus and commitment, Florida could be a leader in clean energy jobs, and that could be a way out of this pandemic economic crisis.
Well, you have the will, and they're fixated on making new toll roads to nowhere. So,
right.
So that's par for the course. I want to talk about this. I know you were working with JJR and before the election, and you probably still are until he leaves office, about trying to pump up those unemployment funds past $275 a week. Any new news on that? Could it happen, at least even if it's a moderate increase of past $275?
So we are now filing the bill with Senator Bobby Powell, since JJR unfortunately did not win his election. Though he should have. He lost it by 33 votes, and we could, fake candidate in his race, et cetera, et cetera. But it's going to be an uphill battle, but we're excited for the fight. I mean, Floridians are engaged in the electoral process and now the legislative process more than they ever have been before. And we're going to be very keen on engaging everyday people on this effort from day one. So the bill is formally in draft right now. We are making some changes to it, but it would increase the weekly benefit amount from $275 before taxes to $500. It would also extend the amount of weeks from the current sliding scale that was at 12 weeks to be 26 weeks, which is the national average. It would create a timeline for DO to get back to you with eligibility concerns, and also have an ombudsman in place so that there's an oversight arm to DO and someone you can go to complain when things are not operating as intended. And of course, these policy changes would also require improvements in software and technology, and DEO is requesting extra dollars to hire more staff and to either change or improve the Connect system. So a lot more to come, and we're ready to have those fights and to empower people on the way.
I have three more questions on COVID-19 before I end. So we saw the governor, he was just in Osceola County at Boggy Creek School, I believe, and he did wear a mask. So congratulations to the governor. We'll give him a little hand for that. So that was a positive thing. At least he did that for the first time in probably a long time. In general, he is pushing for more tourism from Brazil and from Europe. and to try to get people here. But also, what I'm worried about too is in February, the Super Bowl will be in Tampa. He's trying to push for that full stadium of 70,000 people. That's a super spreader event for me. We looked at the Trump rallies. I see the Super Bowl to be the same thing. How can we encourage tourism to the state when there's no mask mandate, and also to make sure that we keep the citizens of Florida safe, but also still try to, encourage that tourism so we can get some of these jobs back?
I've been a firm believer from the very beginning that you can't really solve the economic crisis unless you solve the health crisis first.
Agreed.
And so it's been frustrating because there's been many missed opportunities to really champion health solutions like a mask mandate, where our intentional avoidance of pursuing such tactics have brought us to where we are today. I feel pretty firmly that we still have opportunities to do this right. But I also will say that the idea of closing down the state again, I feel like it is so challenging for everyday people to support that, because where's the safety net? Yep. And I hate saying that, but we, to this day, 9 months later, are still dealing with Floridians that are missing unemployment benefits, who are facing eviction, who are looking for jobs and can't get them. And unless there's like a legitimate safety net that will be there for small businesses that have to close and be there for people that get unemployed again, it's hard for me to even say that that's a good idea right now, because it's like we have to put ourselves in the shoes of directly impacted people. And people want to work. They also are worried about safety. But if we can't guarantee that they're economically going to be secure during this, it's really hard to endorse any type of required closing down of businesses. Now, I do think that social distancing and mask wearing are easy steps we can take to protect our small businesses and keep them open, while also stopping the spread of COVID-19. It's been really admirable to watch, for example, at some of the stores in my district, folks wait in line outside to get in because they're practicing social distancing. And so I know we have the capacity to do this. We love one another. We respect one another. We want each other to be healthy and safe. We want our small businesses to thrive. But even one of my small businesses, a restaurant in my district, they're trying to find another loan right now, because though they've been able to reimagine how they serve food, they're only making about 60-80% of what they were making before. So they're still not making their costs met. And so I think we have to really be critical of, what do we do next? But the reality is that opening up the state, like the governor has done, has not brought in new visitors to the point where jobs are coming back. I mean, Disney's announcing more layoffs, and Disney has been open, as you know, for months now, under a limited capacity. And we haven't seen the spread of COVID-19 come from the theme parks, from their theme parks, which is fantastic. That's because they follow really strict rules. But they're not seeing maximum capacity be met on the weekdays. They're not seeing international visitors. They're not seeing folks who want to fly to Florida. Anyone who's coming to their park are usually in driving distance. And so again, this notion of well, if we open things up, people will just show up is not true. People will show up if they feel safe. So you have to create the environment where people can feel safe.
I agree 100%. I want to talk with the last question on COVID-19 about the vaccine. We heard very good things. I just saw on the news before we did this on CNN that they said Britain is about to get their vaccine out within this week. So that's great news for them. But also we see a lot of good news as far as the vaccine makers are concerned in this country. So with that said, we know that they're going to go out to the frontline workers first and people in nursing homes in general. Have you spoke to the governor's office or the Democratic caucus? Have they spoke to the governor's office about the distribution of the vaccine when it is ready for everybody just like us?
So we are in the process as a state of finalizing the distribution plan. There is a draft plan that's available that we've shared on our social media outlets as well. And this week, the prioritization was established of, who would be tier 1 to be able to access the vaccine. but I think there still are a lot of questions around specifics of what would distribution sites be when it becomes more readily available to the general public. I'm sure our current testing sites, our current state testing sites would be converted to vaccination locations. But of course, thinking about it from prioritizing healthcare workers, also having to have, for some of the vaccines, you have to have super cold temperatures to store them and gloves to hold them when they're that cold. So I think there's also a question of just infrastructure. And I know that Jared Moskowitz, our director of emergency management, is working on all those logistics. So, we're lucky to have a Democrat in that position for sure.
I agree. So you are considering running for governor in 2022. There also is a U.S. Senate seat against Marco Rubio that will be up in 2022. It's not far away. We're almost in 2021. So you will have to make a formal announcement regardless, within the future, because you obviously have to fundraise, you have to campaign, all that jazz. So when would you consider making the announcement, yes or no? When do you have to make that? Is there a deadline, or is there something that you have in your mind as far as a date?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're processing, right? We're looking at what the landscape looks like in 2022. I love serving my district. Of course, we'll have redistricting, so lines are gonna look differently as well. But I hope to make a decision soon. I mean, ideally, I can feel confident in our next steps within the next few months, because my track record of campaigning is we usually start at least 18 months in advance, because I think it's really important to build groundwork, no matter what the level of seat you're running for. So we want to make a decision pretty soon. So we're processing everything. We're talking to stakeholders. We're talking to our constituents and really working to envision, what makes the most sense right now and how can we better serve the people of Florida.
So how can you give people some hope right now as far as maybe what's coming up in the session, as far as bills that you may be putting out, or anything in general that you know?
There's always space for hope, without a doubt. I know it feels tough, but we do have some incredible new Democrats in the Florida legislature that are going to be fierce and passionate about the issues they care about. And we're going to be championing climate change, fixing the employment system, affordable housing, workers' rights, protecting our environment and land and water conservation, supporting survivors of sexual assault, protecting access to healthcare, especially reproductive healthcare, and promoting and fighting to fund mental health. So we're going to be addressing mass incarceration. So sometimes it's about how hard you fight, even when you don't think you're going to win, right? In places like Tallahassee. But when we maintain hope and tough optimism, it sets a tone that anything is possible. So I encourage folks to have that tough optimism and know that Florida will change. It just depends on who's going to lead that change. And we have to remain committed to really build the state that we envision for ourselves and for our future.
Well, if you're living in Florida, I hope you're grateful, because we do have a great state representative here for Florida House District 47, Anna Eskamani. Anna, thanks so much for serving us. Even if we don't live in your district, or if we do, we're grateful to have you as a representative for the state of Florida.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be here, and
right.
It has a safe holiday.